Illustration 2. Today I will be painting this purple and white Cattleya orchid. The palette for today's painting will be American Journey, Sap Green and Ultramarine Blue, Daniel Smith, Carbazole Violet, Winsor & Newton, Permanent Rose, Holbein, Gamboge Nova, Horizon Blue, Payne's Gray, and Sepia. I've been using the 9x12 blocks for all the videos so far, so I thought I'd better do a smaller one. I'm going to be working with a larger piece of paper today, but I wanted to make sure that the 9x12 was a doable painting, and it is quite detailed. It's got a lot going on down here, but it is doable. This is the tracing that I used, and I made a lot of notes on the bottom here showing which ones were the green areas, which were the background areas, and some of the darker colors and the lighter colors. So I will have that on the Facebook page to download. So the larger size will be a 12x16 that we'll be working with today. This is the tracing. I did make notes on this one as well. And then remember, if you do decide to do a larger size, when you go to download the sketch, when you go to print it out, you will need to make sure that you enlarge before you print it out, and you'll get 4 pieces of paper that you need to piece together. There is a detailed video under the tips for the artist, and it's called From Photo to Sketch, if you would like to review that, if you do decide to do a larger size. This is the paper we will be using today. It's a Sanders Waterford, made in England, 140-pound cold press, and it is also 100% cotton. So it'll be fun to do a little bit of a larger size, and we're going to start with the background first. First thing is to wet the background thoroughly with water, and we're going to have 2 colors. Remember, we're going to have the horizon blue and the yellow, but this is going to have to be nice and wet. And remember, when I do put down the 2 colors, I'm going to try to separate as best I can the yellow and the blue so it doesn't run together a lot. It's going to run some because blue and yellow make green, right? So I don't want to have a green background. I want it to be kind of a bicolor. Now this may buckle some, but it will flatten back out as it dries. It just has to be very wet. I'm not going into all the tiny spaces. I will use a smaller brush to try to get in there. Also, I'm going to try to put the yellow maybe in a few spots, but not right up next to these white petals, because I would like to have the best contrast that I can, and the yellow will not make those white petals pop out. I think I'll use 2 brushes as well. I'll probably do 1 color at a time. I'll let that mix a little bit right there. That's going to be green. Notice I'm not going right up to the lines here. I think I'll take a smaller brush to make sure I don't get too sloppy with that. It will spread itself some, a little bit on its own. You see, it is buckling some as well. That's okay. And I'm not really going for a perfectly even wash, and that's fine. Some variability will be just fine. There'll be some lighter areas and some darker areas. See, I tried to keep the yellow away from these white petals so that the blue will make the white show a little bit better. As long as it's nice and wet, you can go back and add some more. If it starts to dry out on you, then don't go back and fiddle with it, because then you're going to get back runs and all kinds of interesting things will happen. I'll take a smaller brush and see if I can get closer to some of these areas that are the edges. It always looks a bit messy when you are doing it and when it's wet. You just have to be patient and let it dry. It will even itself out some, and it will look so much nicer. Guaranteed. Starting to dry out a little bit along those lines there because I did not wet it right up next to the flower, but that's okay, it should be all right. You see a little hair there. That's something you get every once in a while. Just have to leave it for now. Still wet, so I can add a little bit there. I had a little green leaf here. I think I'll take that out. There is a little pencil line there. It should fade. Almost done. You can see a nice puddle right there. It's kind of cool. You can see where it mixed and it's turning green right there. Blend that a little bit. Okay. See if we can get rid of that pencil line. Perfectionist that I am, I have to go through and just make a few more little corrections. All right, we're going to have to let that dry some. We'll be back in a minute. Next, I will do this purple area of the two blooms, and I mixed up some violet and a little bit of permanent rose because I wanted the violet to be a little bit of a redder color. This is what it looks like without the permanent rose. Let's see if I got it too red. That's good, that's better. You can see a subtle difference there. Perhaps maybe just a little more permanent rose. Now I haven't wet the paper yet, and you don't have to. I don't think I'm going to. But to get into all these little fringy spaces here, I'm going to have to go back to a smaller brush. I'll be switching back and forth. It's really deep, a deep color here. Remember, it will dry a little bit lighter. I'm getting into these little spaces pretty well with this brush, so I may not switch. We'll see. If you do decide to jump to another area, make sure you don't let this dry out too much, because then you will not get a very even wash. Just keep an eye on it. If it starts to dry out, you need to jump back and take care of this area here. Always let that edge stay wet if you can. That helps even out your wash. I'm going to switch brushes to a smaller filbert and do these little spaces in here. I think I'll need to mix up some more paint, so I will be right back. I've finished the other purple area. Before we move on to the next section, there are a couple of things that I would like for you to notice. If you look at these two purple areas, this one has more red in it, this one has more blue in it. So when you have to stop and mix up another batch of paint, it's really hard to get it to the exact shade that you would like each time. So if you can, it's best to get as much paint as you think you'll use in one mix. But I'm not going to do anything about it right now. The second thing is that you'll notice right here, this is not real even. I had my mixture over here mixed and it was starting to dry out on me, so when I apply this one little section here, you can see what happens when you apply the paint too dry. It starts to get blotchy. This one was much more even. The mix in the palette was a lot wetter. So those are two things that you can notice that you can do to improve upon. Now the next thing I will do is to put some very light yellow-green areas on these petals. Usually when you have white petals, if you look closely, they're not really white. They have all kinds of nuances to them. They've got gray areas, maybe some bluish areas. In this case, I'm going to use a mixture of sap green and some of the gamboge yellow. I worked on it for a few minutes, just trying to get the right mixture. I don't want it too yellow or too green, but if you find that it's too one or the other, you can make adjustments, or if it's too dark, you can add water to it and dilute it. These are still a little wet, so I'm going to try not to mess those up. And it's going to go on pretty wet. That might be a little bit too yellow. I want it to be kind of a light green. You can always blot it up as well, like that. Try again. Let's see, this one, I think that's the one I used. That looks pretty good. I'll fade that a little bit with a moist brush. The edges are white. I'm going to leave those white. And it doesn't have to be exact. I had some pencil lines here. I should have erased those. They may end up showing up later. They may not disappear totally. What happened here with this petal, it's actually part of this bloom, but it was folded back. it will dry lighter. I got them all. Bring this down some. Now we will start on some of the green areas down on the bottom. I took a basic sap green and I added some ultramarine blue to it to make it a little bit darker. For comparison, here is the sap green, and here it is with ultramarine blue mixed in. So we're going to need some lights, some darks, and some mediums on the bottom. And then I'm going to use some Payne's Gray to kind of add to that later. This will start work from left to right. I may have to tilt this just a little bit. I know I'm going to need to mix up some more green as well. So let's just start over on this edge here. That one's pretty dark. And remember, I made notes on my sketch because it gets a little confusing down here. These are just first layers. You can always go back and do multiple layers on these. Put some shadowing and some highlights as well. This is just the first layer. This had, looks like a little bite mark on it. I'm going to take a little bit of the sepia while it's still wet, a little sepia around the edge, just for fun. We could do that later as well. We don't have to do it on the initial wash. This is sort of a medium green here. You will just have to look carefully on this sketch to make sure you get the right shades in the right areas. That one is kind of yellowish, has a yellowish tint to it. I will continue to go through this bottom area and get all the greens. The darks, the lights, and maybe a medium green here and there. Back again, I've done all the bottom filling in. I did some darks, some lights, some medium, and I also had some areas of the background that I needed to do. I really just followed my sketch. I had made notes on what to fill in where, and it's coming along. I have some embellishments to do down here, but it's basically all filled in. We're going to work on the flowers now, the blooms, and I would like to use just straight Payne's Gray to make it simple. You might want to mix up your own gray. You could use blue and sienna. That makes a very nice gray, but I'm just going to, for convenience, use Payne's Gray right now. And I'm just going to make some definition on the flowers. This may still be a little wet. You could mix a little green with Payne's Gray if you wanted to. This is really interesting when you do this along the tops. It's amazing how quickly it changes the way the flower looks. You're trying to have the petals not look so flat. That's all you're doing. And then adding some shadowing. It's pretty light too, you don't need much paint. Now this area here is shadow. And what I do sometimes is try to lighten it as I go out away from it, and you can just dab it. I'm going over the light yellow-green that I had previous. I did forget to erase my pencil lines right there. They're probably not going to come up. It's something you might want to do. Where you want it to be darker, for example, right behind something that is standing forward, you want to get behind it, you may have to go over that twice after it dries. You can always lift if you don't like it. See, I don't really want hard lines there, so I sort of fade it out. Remember I said this petal here goes with this flower. It's kind of folded over, so I'm going to try to make that appear that it's on top of this one. Kind of want to get rid of that hard line there. Payne's gray is a strong color, so you need to make sure you use it very dilutely in this case. in some places I'm going around again. You would need to do that 2 or 3 times probably. Another thing that's a little awkward is putting some of this Payne's gray right over the yellow in the throats of these blooms. It's going to look kind of odd. It's way too dark. I'm going to try to fade it out. Lots of details. Sometimes you can set it up and stand back away from it and you'll be able to see some of the corrections you need to make. For time's sake, I'm going to stop with that. You might want to add more. I would like to do something with the purple quickly. I would like to deepen up underneath here. This is also not flat, so it's dark, so you don't have to fade it that much. Go around the edges here. You get the idea. Okay, I'm just going to touch up the bottom a little bit. Put a few embellishments there using some sepia and maybe some dark green. These areas where the stems join, I'm just going to put a little bit of sepia there. Nothing major, but it does spruce it up a little bit. Put some dark green on that one. I'll smooth those out in a minute. Actually, I remember I wanted to put some gray on that. Let's do that. Let that soften up. I'm going to fix that. One thing I did on the original painting was to take these translucent margins that are on these leaves and put a very light coating of very, very light gray on there, the light Payne's gray. You can do that if you want to. I think I'll just leave them white right now. I kind of like the contrast between that and the white on the fringy edges of these blooms. And I would see right now that I definitely would want to continue to do some shadowing. Also underneath here, that's another area that could use some shadowing. Things like that. And you can keep working with little embellishments like that. But I think I will pretty much say this one is complete for today. I see some things. You can just play with it, play with it. I see some things where you might want to smooth it out and just put some more shadowing. And you might even go over again some of these areas here. For example, just put another little darker area there. It sort of emphasizes it. Lots of little things you can do. But there is a time to say you should know when to quit, so you don't want to keep doing it until you just mess it up. So I see right here, you put some shadowing, some other areas around here that you can shadow, and also clean it up a little bit. Let me just show you that real fast. For example, right here, you could smooth this out with a moist brush, make it nice and even, things like that. It's not dry there. I wanted to fix that little area, but I'll have to wait till it dries. So I will call it done. And there you have it. And you can do this. You certainly can do this. It's not that hard. I hope you will join me for the third demonstration. I will be working on a very pretty yellow Phalaenopsis orchid. So see you then.